Okay, it is 12:45. Welcome to the CFPR Lunchtime Seminar. Welcome to everyone in the room and welcome to everyone online. I'm just going to admit someone else here. Just to say that we are recording the talk. Today's talk is by Lisa Sheppy, who's had a long association, not only with the CFPR, also with UWE and Bristol as a undergraduate student or an MA student, all the way up to the to PhD. So as usual, if anyone has any questions for Lisa, please put them in the chat and we'll ask them. Or if you're here, please raise your hand or ask Lisa in person who's here with us. So just without further ado, here's Lisa. Okay, I'm just going to turn this around to you. So I might just hover to just let people in, and
okay.
You can just.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just so I can see mine.
Okay, yeah.
Hello, everyone. I really love to see you all here this afternoon for my talk. I'm Dr. Lisa Sheppy. I'm an artist and researcher, and I was awarded my doctorate last year from the Centre for Print Research here at the University of West of England in Bristol. My study was based on the historic, industrial and near obsolete technique of tissue transfer printing through the lens of contemporary printmaking.
Hang on.
Can I admit somebody? Oh,
Yeah,
there we
you
go.
can.
Do you want me to do it? So where's my cursor? Ooh. Sorry, where's the? Oh, there's me. There we go. Lovely. Right, sorry. Right. So what was underglazed tissue transfer printed ceramics? It's a bit of a tongue twister. So I refer to it as tissue transferware in my PhD, and I describe it also as an industrial craft. Much of the knowledge surrounding this craft has been lost as the pottery industries have closed or replaced printing on ceramics with newer and more cost-effective forms of decoration. I need my notes. So unlike many industrial forms of printmaking, such as screen printing, tissue transferware has never made the transition from industry to contemporary art practice. It's never been made accessible to art practice, even though the printed image offers a distinctive mark-making possibility for artists. And my PhD has changed this trajectory. It uses a particular method of production, which in general terms works like this. The pattern is printed with ink containing ceramic material and oil onto thin tissue paper. This is derived from an intaglio printmaking process and the use of copper plate engraving. The printed pattern on the tissue is transferred onto the ceramic form and remains in place with the manual manipulation and viscosity of the ink. The printed tissue is malleable and can therefore reach into a complex 3D surface. The pattern is underglazed and kiln fired on the ceramic before a final glaze firing renders the ceramic object resilient and impervious to liquid. So during the 19th century, many blue and white patterns would have been decorated using this method of printmaking and ceramics. Defined by its distinctive aesthetic, recognizable as an intricate image constructed from lines and dots in a monochrome color, the distinctive halo effect to the printed marks are achieved through two separate firings when the color flows readily into the clay body, so the printed marks appear painterly with soft tonal ranges. The most well-known pattern was a Chinese-inspired motif known as the willow pattern in cobalt blue. So the aim of my study was to design and document a practice-based inquiry on a method of producing tissue transferware through the lens of contemporary printmaking. In doing this, a historic and near obsolete industrial craft would be reinstated and preserved for future creatives. Firstly, I'm going to discuss the archival research that I made at the Museum of Royal Worcester, which provided the foundation for the investigation and enabled it to progress. The second phase of the research presents the derived principles from historical research, demonstrating a technically working method conducted at the Centre for Print Research. The final and concluding part of this talk, I reveal my artist position from which I was able to respond, visualizing its artistic potential in a series of printed ceramic artworks, thus advocating a future for it. So the archive at Royal Worcester initiated the research with detail of the transferware narrative and Royal Worcester's contribution to it. The archive resonates through the study, delivering direct and personal interaction with tangible materials connected to creative human endeavour. In the archive, I had open access to the primary material dating from the 1750s, which I was able to record, reflect, and respond creatively. And during these archival visits to Worcester, I was able to study the unseen artefacts, which contain the human hub of ceramic production at Worcester. Initially, I focused on the archive as a whole and searched for any material relating to tissue transferware production, such as copper plate engravings, tissue transfer pattern books, and tissue print pulls. However, I soon discovered other primary material meaningful to the project. This included design pattern books dating back to the early 19th century, a design reference library, and original paintings and drawings made by artists who were designers working in the pottery. Apart from the printed literature, other material contained hand-rendered content, such as written notes, letters, ledgers, recipes, drawings, designs, and paintings, a visual arrangement of connected ephemera associated with Worcester's ceramic manufacturing past. I'm attracted to the DNA of the pottery workers within the materials, such as the pattern books, which represent meticulous, slow work of the designers and artists in the 19th and 20th centuries. The taxonomy of patterns neatly presented as reference material represents slow, quiet work rendered by the tactile touch of pen and ink on paper, watercolour washes of mixed colour with handwritten notes and references to glazes and numbered copper plates. The books contain oil stains, annotations, dates, fingerprints, paint splashes, sellotape, all indicative of constant use within a historic ceramic industry. This features two views of Pressed Seaweed, Volume 2, a beautifully preserved book containing pressed and dried seaweed. The fragments presented in the book, discoloured to a pink colour with crystals of salt still attached. The book, together with others, represents a valuable resource for the designers at Worcester, and it was intriguing to view the design library as evidence of the reference material used historically, investigating the visual world as a component of the design process. The Lady's Amusement by Robert Sayre, 1762, is a compilation of images produced by fashionable illustrators from that period for the purpose of inspiration and interpretation. The museum has 2 copies, and I was directed to this volume as an example of source imagery from the 18th century. And many of these images would have been interpreted by the engravers within the pottery for transfer printing. Robert Hancock was the artist engraver attributed to many of Worcester's early printed pieces. And here shows his exquisite work from 1763 and demonstrates how the engraved marks are transformed from the copper plate into the finished printed and ceramic cup. Robert Hancock is said to have introduced a method of transfer print which was unrivaled in terms of its clarity and detail. This became a highly valued and desirable genre of ceramics. He was apprenticed under the French artist Simon-François Ravenet and trained to copy many of the French masters, such as Watteau, Boucher, and Lancret from the French Rococo style. The success of Hancock's transfer technique helped to establish Worcester as a leading manufacturer of transfer printed porcelain, and he subsequently became a partner in the business with Dr. John Wall in 1772. So the next part of the talk, I demonstrate each part of the derived production method, linking traditional autographic and manual material practices with the digital and mechanical, fusing printmaking and ceramic knowledge. I describe the historical method of producing transferware and illustrate how, as a printmaker, I have designed a new process based on these deductions. I describe the historical method of producing transferware. Sorry, just repeat the same sentence. The one thing we need to be aware of here is that the pottery's transferware was produced within an industrial manufacturing system within the divisions of labour, meaning that each individual was solely responsible for their part and not the whole process. The production method, which could potentially be performed by one single practitioner, materialized the research and presented a new interpretation of tissue transferware for artistic invention. So, the engraving printmaking process kickstart the industrial method of production, requiring technical and manual skills, but also the autographic interpretive skills of the individual engraver. This is a highly skilled and time-consuming process to complete an engraving. To complete an engraving for one dinner plate would take up to approximately 2 months, and for a large serving dish, up to 6 months. The apprenticeship to become an engraver was 5 years, and the training took place within the pottery under the master engraver. Engraving plates were highly valued in the potteries and were traded as currency. And for this study, I was lucky enough to have the pleasure of meeting and interviewing Paul Holdaway, who was the master engraver at Spode. And his input was vital to the understanding of the process, as much of his knowledge is tacit and difficult to describe into simple terms. When Spode closed in 2008, the team of 12 engravers became unemployed and never again worked professionally with the engraving process in an industrial context. This profession is now redundant. So firstly, drawing with digital tools to interpret mark-making characteristics of the copper plate engravings enabled the production of printing plates using an acrylic substrate. At the outset, my objective was to equip myself with digital drawing tools so I could respond both creatively and technically, thus championing a method of printmaking previously closed to non-specialists. The designs were created using digital vector graphics, beginning with those available on an iPad and then advancing to the Wacom tablet and Adobe Illustrator. An online laser engraving bureau replaced the manual tooling required to construct a copper plate engraving. And this facilitated iterative testing of the variables of the process to take place effectively without losing momentum. So many examples of early transferware use the effective cobalt oxide as a blue colorant, which is instantly recognizable. Historically, the ceramic underglaze ink for printing was prepared in-house. Therefore, very few recipes exist that could be repeatable by today's health and safety standards. The ink was a challenge and a threat to the effectiveness of the process and had to be overcome through manual dexterity and discovering effective components that blended and printed effectively. The use of tissue paper used for tissue transfer printing was thin but strong and initially sized with soft soap. I would describe the paper as being very much like cigarette paper. The sizing enables the tissue to remain flexible and helps the printed image stick to the paper and pick up the ink effectively. And these beautiful prints were from Worcester's collection. Printing in the potteries followed an intaglio method of printmaking. which technically works like this. Ink was applied to the copper plate and worked into the recess of the engraved marks, loosened with heat. The plate is then wiped firmly and continuously until the ink remains in the recessed marks and the uppermost surface of the plate is wiped clean. So printing the design onto tissue with intaglio methods echoes that used in the potteries. The difference here is that no heat is used in this method. Using my etching press, the inked white plate is placed onto the bed of the press, covered with tissue dampened on the back with soft soap, and then secured with a number of blankets. The plate then passes through the press backwards and forwards to ensure the ink is printed effectively onto the tissue. As the tissue is printed, it's cut manually to shape and placed print down onto the unglazed ware. Then, with the use of friction, the paper was smoothed and rubbed with a piece of flannel to transfer the image. This was a highly skilled, efficient operation, and there remains only one pottery, Burley in Stoke-on-Trent, who still employs these tissue transfer printing methods. After transferring, the ware is fired twice. In the first firing, the printed pattern is hardened on at a low temperature, which renders the print stable on the ware and burns away all the print residues. The final clear glaze firing is much higher and laminates the printed pattern under the glaze and renders the ceramic object resilient to continuous domestic use. Through years of tacit knowledge, professional transferers give the illusion of an effortless operation. However, this is far from the case for a newcomer. When the tissue is released from the plate, it is flimsy and likely to stick onto itself, so needs to be handled quickly and effectively and placed into the final transferring position. The print is burnished from the back with pressure, leaving the printed pattern from the tissue onto the ceramic surface. The two firing schedules follow a traditional method and do not change from the historical deductions. At this point in the research, I had a precise method of production to move the work from tests to artworks. So now I've got so here I include a short video. It shows the process I've just described from mixing the ink to printing and transferring the pattern. Can you hear it?
Want a sample?
Yes, please. It's got some nice sounds.
Oh.
Yeah. How does it take you to perfect that? It looks very, very slick there, doesn't it? About 2 years. But yeah, quite a while. For the print to kind of, work in that kind of seamless way. Yeah. So in the final part of this talk, I reveal my artist position with a discussion of my background and some of the influences. As an artist, my relationship with printmaking has been a gradual one. Originally, I trained as a fine arts. I trained in fine art as a painter, but I became frustrated with the singular medium and its limitations. So my continuous interest in printmaking and its transformative properties were initiated on my MA in multidisciplinary printmaking and beyond, as I was attracted to ceramics and glass as a ways of carrying and encasing the printed image to explore the material connections between the substrate and the printed image. In a previous project, I worked at the Archive at the Bronte Parsonage Museum in Haworth in Yorkshire, examining garments that once belonged to Charlotte Bronte. The museum had previously been the private residence of the Bronte family. No photography was allowed in this instance, so all responses were generated through drawing and note-taking with a pencil. The act of drawing from observation the objects containing the traces of previous inhabitants and the haptic interaction introduced me personally to the Bronte narrative and the lives of these women experienced through their clothing. I've always been driven to explore new material practices. For this series of works, I connected the kiln firing schedules for enamel transfers to glass firing, enabling me to laminate collage printed imagery within glass panels. This echoed the physical museum and the glass vitrine, housing enshrined evocative objects, imbuing a jewel-like and melancholic presence. Here, I show one of the works in the series, Charlotte's Dress, which was a prize-winning work at the British Glass Biennale. The printed image with metal foil inclusions unified the glass vignettes and allowed for a fluidity and a freedom of expression, which I continued to cultivate until I began my PhD in 2017. The pattern books in the museum in Worcester and the clothing belonging to Charlotte Bronte had long lost their function. However, their resonance was still powerful as they became evocative, tangible objects. I investigated the archives at the Museum of Royal Worcester to decipher the production methods of industrial decorated ceramics and provide some starting points for creative responses. The relationship between artist and researcher was simultaneous as I searched for clues in the objects connected to an intensely human activity of making. In this detail from one of the pattern books, I was scrutinizing the process of making embedded in the pages. I observed the laborious acts of recording the patterns to make a taxonomy of imagery as a commodity for the ceramics industry. From being anonymous things in a museum, they became transformed into my evocative objects, from which I was able to bring personal connections and meaning. So the most straightforward and immediate way to record an image is by drawing. However, I needed to find a digital equivalent to be able to translate drawings into engravings. I sought to interpret hand-rendered copperplate engravings with digital laser engraving technology, presenting a previously closed printmaking method with a contemporary and accessible version. Through digital and vector drawing methods, I could make multiples of the same image and export them as laser engraved printing plates. In addition to this, I also endeavoured to devise a method to print tissue transfer with an accumulative pattern onto an entire compound surface. Working digitally with each of my photographic image taken from the archive, opened in Adobe Illustrator, I increased the scale of the individual hand-rendered marks to create a microscopic image. I began a series of responses, looking in forensic detail at the form of the works, the line, the shape, the pattern, reconstructing a digital drawing interpretation of the original. In doing this, I interacted and connected with the technical and artistic expertise of the original engraving to make my own interpretation. Through drawing with tools in Illustrator, I was able to familiarize myself and become close to the subject and separate the formal elements of the engraved mark making. Okay. So at the time of making these responses, we were required to work from home because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I chose to respond to other objects which had personal connections, such as this packaging, which held face masks dating back to the 1960s. I was attracted to the historic graphic illustration style whilst picturing an instruction to wear the mask and protect your health. The imagery was dystopian and related to a universal feeling of uncertainty in the years 2020 to 2021, where we were living through the global threat of the COVID-19 pandemic. The juxtaposition to the flower imagery worked as a powerful contrast. So my intention here was to make a taxonomy of imagery using 21st century digital drawing tools to reference 19th century activity of design generation based on my scrutiny of the pattern books in Worcester's archive. In this discussion, I have described the drawing process using Adobe Illustrator to replicate a tissue transfer engraving mark making, replacing lines and dots with a vector graphic interpretation. In doing this, I was able to produce my own pattern book whilst formulating a visual alphabet and image bank for intuitive collage method of creative expression. Here I present my responses to the tissue transferware narrative as a pattern book of source images. This provided the visual threads to resonate through and into the final ceramic artworks. So a challenge in the sequence of creative decisions was how to make three-dimensional shapes with a limited professional knowledge of ceramic construction. The shapes would provide a printing canvas for compound surfaces and demonstrate the distinct character of tissue transfer printmaking. I considered using ready-made biscuitware, but on reflection decided this would neither be original or visually challenging. So I refer here to Henry Sandon's book from 1969, Worcester Porcelain, 1761 to 1793. And in this, Sandon details the hardened-on shards from the 1760s found on the Wormstree House site, which was excavated in 1968. My aim was to echo the shard fragments excavated from the archaeological finds that identified Worcester as the instigator of the original transferware process. After a number of discussions with my supervisors at the Centre for Print Research, I decided that the extrusion of clay shapes would be the way to progress the study with clay forms on which to transfer print my designs. I discussed my ideas with reference to the manual and mechanical, combining the two fundamental elements and technologies, ceramic extrusion and tissue transfer printing. The dies for the extrusion were fabricated using 3D printing technology and implied connections to the industrial past of tool making whilst being innovative and from the 21st century. The cross-fertilization of new and historic technologies worked theoretically, thematically and visually with the project. The clay moved slowly through the extruder and the hydraulic pump powering it through the die to form a shape. These images show the process of extrusion as a means to manipulate form with gentle and minimal handling to shape and model the clay. I was happy with how the machine and hand could work in sync, gently forming the shapes while twisting the form into a natural curve. Appeared crude, but suggested part of a functional object with visual connections to excavation and archaeology. The abstract forms created through the extrusion at first alluded to industrial functional ceramic objects such as soil piping and guttering, far removed from the decorative domestic ceramic objects traditionally associated with transferware. Once fired to biscuitware, these compound ceramic shapes became my printing canvases. I chose to change my colour palette from the single dominant blue colour associated with tissue transferware to include a range of colours. The decision to use a new colour palette with multi-layered printed imagery further transform the material outcomes from tests to artworks. I discovered that the transferred colours could be collaged and layered without lifting the colours underneath during the transferring stage, enabling the printed image to become accumulative and painterly. Introducing a new colour palette and moving away from the recognisable blue and white ceramics brought a contemporary colour aesthetic to my transferware and advocated more of its creative potential. Here shows the results of the testing new colours before committing to the final outcomes. So the fragmented forms not only relate to historical findings from my archival study, but they also provided a complete 3D printing surface on which to tissue transfer prints my collection of designs, imbuing the transferware narrative from my perspective, the printmaker. Collage as a form of visual language underpins my practice as a printmaker, and in the final artworks, I manipulated and constructed printed marks to build a composite image. Assembling and arranging a selection of images as a collage allowed for the fluid and creative way of making. Beginning with no real plan or preconceived design, the imagery emerged and transformed into a final printed object. Ceramic construction with machine and manual procedures produced a series of 3D shapes, which unified the material research while referring to fragments of history excavated in the archaeological findings from Worcester. The application of layered printed imagery, producing nuances of colour with soft tonal ranges, appealed to my fine art sensibilities as a printed surface emerged from the white ceramic substrate. As an artist, I enjoy the element of surprise when printed imagery is positioned and juxtaposed to create visual dialogues. And for this series of artworks, the familiar fowl patterns based on Worcester pattern books were situated alongside the dystopian masked figure to establish a visual alphabet for a series of work. The juxtaposition of patterns interpreted from anonymous labour represent the collective works in the pattern books, which are now restricted items from view in the archive at Royal Worcester. The transferware narrative evoked in the imagery was facilitated by collage methods, creating a printed composite image that is removed from the traditional and instantly identifiable blue and white pattern. So I've endeavoured to contribute to new knowledge through my PhD study and interpret a historical method of ceramic decoration and give it new life. My innovation is reinterpreting a historical process, not replacing it, maintaining engraving printmaking at the centre. Engraving for tissue transfer was an industrial but human automated process, and the repetition of mark making produced the same motifs and subsequently was never a printmaking method for artists. This method was hidden inside the closed factory. This study has exposed this knowledge through a walkthrough demonstration of how the method works technically, which I created by responding as both a researcher and artist. Through this, I have established the potential and future for tissue transferware, so it may become part of creative practice in the future. So since I've been awarded my doctorate, I've been busy sharing aspects of my outcomes and knowledge with others. I've exhibited a number of my printed works, which were selected for the Royal Society of Painter Printmakers last summer, and the Woolwich Contemporary Printmaking Exhibition in London, as well as appearing in some articles in Printmaking Today and Pressing Matters. And I'm also hoping to write a book. So I continue to be driven by material exploration and developments derived from my research, and I'm looking forward to new collaborations and projects. The end.